Welcome back to the Balancing Act podcast. I'm Andy Temte. On the Balancing Act, we talk to business leaders and industry experts to explore the balancing acts we play in our professional lives and learn about the events that put rocket boosters behind their career success. Today, we have Patrick Hardy joining us. Patrick is a disaster preparedness specialist. He's a keynote speaker and an adventurer. He's currently president at Hytropy Disaster Management and is the author of Design Any Disaster, the revolutionary blueprint to master your next crisis or emergency. Sounds like loads of fun. We're going to have a blast today, Patrick. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Andrew. I'm glad to be here. Yes, it's one of those exciting things, and that's really the purpose of my career. Is I really want to show people disaster preparedness doesn't have to be awful. It can be something really interesting. So I'm glad we'll be able to get into that today.
Awesome. Well, I ask all my guests this question. Please tell our listeners the short version of your story.
No problem. It all started when I was a swimmer in high school. So I swam in high school, and I swam the events that nobody likes to do. So I used to swim the 500, the 1,000, and the mile. And I was only 5'6" at the time. So, and I was really thin. And so I'm not going to the Olympics or anything, but they just said, listen, we need to have somebody to fill out these events that the really guys, the ones who are going to be competitive, can go to CIF. And so I said, sure. So I did the events, and I never was competitive. But I'll tell you what, at the end of the time of the swimming season, a bunch of guys said, listen, we want to go out and be lifeguards. And I thought, great, because the initial event to become a lifeguard, I lived by an open water lake, and you had to swim across the lake, and then you had to swim back. And then you had to run around the lake. And so because I'd done so much endurance exercise, I actually ended up beating all those other guys because I was sort of slow and steady because I'd been so used to swimming the mile, right? So it was really great. Then after the lifeguarding season was over, a bunch of guys said, listen, we want to all become EMTs. So I went and became an EMT, and I became a medic. And then at that same time, I was going to college. And I studied political science. And, when you study political science, everybody has kind of a cause, a reason that they're studying political science. They want to, end famine or, eliminate nuclear weapons or stop all warfare or whatever. And I didn't have that. I didn't have any of that stuff. And so what ended up happening was I graduated and I didn't know what I was going to do. And in August, on August 28th, 2005, I turned on my television, and that's when Hurricane Katrina made landfall. And seeing the debacle made me think, this is something I can really make a difference in. So I merged my vocational background and my academic background, and I said, this is something I can probably solve in my lifetime if I really put myself to it. So I started working for the governor's office, and basically this is how it happened. I wrote a letter to the governor of Louisiana. I just said, listen, I'm a nobody, but I graduate top of my class, and I really want to work for you. This is an important thing. And they called me back and said, terrific, we'd love to have you. But here's the deal. We'll give you a place to live. You're going to live in the state police barracks. Okay. So we'll give you a car to borrow, which you can use the car. We'll give you food from the cafeteria, and you're only going to make $1,500 a month. But you can do all the Homeland Security trainings you want anywhere in the country. And you work for us 110 hours a week. Does that sound good? And I said, I'm on the next plane. And so I went to New Orleans, and that's how it all got started. And from there, I worked there, and I worked in private sector. I was a consultant for Fortune 500 companies. And then I went to Europe. I got a graduate education, and I won a business prize. And I came back and I opened a small business disaster company. And so here we are today.
That's fantastic. What a wonderful story. I'm sitting here in Wisconsin. Minnesota's right next door, land of 10,000 lakes. That story of having to swim across the lake and back is a very familiar tale up in this neck of the woods. Patrick, you had lots of accelerator moments in the description of your story. Was there one key accelerant, like rocket booster moment, somebody that you met that just really accelerated your career?
My very first boss, without question. because I worked with her. Her name is Susan, and she was somebody who I met her. And incidentally, on my very first day of work, we passed each other in the lobby. And she shook my hand and said, "Patrick, I'm your new boss. Just letting you know I'm going to be gone for the next 2 weeks. I'm going to be at this conference. But here's the thing." And she handed me a binder and she said, "I want you to work on this binder." It was a big disaster plan. She says, "Work on it. I'll see you in 2 weeks." Came back. And she and I worked so well together, even to this very day. She is one of my closest and dearest friends. Even though she's at the point of retiring now. But she really accelerated my career. She gave me a chance. Whenever I said, "Hey, Susan, may I try this? May I learn this? May I be in these meetings?" She never, ever, ever, not one time said no, because she realized I was very self-directed and she was able to read me very well. And mind you, she was a lawyer. But she was such an easygoing person. I mean, she was really tough when she had to be. But when she and I were working together, whenever I said I want to do this training or I want to meet these folks, she always said absolutely, and that was the key accelerant. So finding a mentor was the best thing I ever did in my career.
Yeah. And that mentor was investing in you at every turn, allowing you to learn and grow. That is a fantastic story. So much to talk about today, but let's start with this book, Design Any Disaster. I love the subtitle, The Revolutionary Blueprint. Can you take us through the primary takeaway for readers?
Yeah, and the reason why I call it revolutionary is not just because I'm trying to, boost sales. It was because I wanted to tell people this is a revolution, because you can take anything, any quote disaster, and turn it into an advantage for yourself, what I call the disruptive advantage. But the key element is you need to realize, and people who read the book have to realize, that disasters and the severity of a disaster is not based on the category size of the hurricane or the point on the Richter scale of the earthquake. That has nothing to do with the severity of the disaster. What the severity of the disaster is dependent on is your dependency on other people to handle disasters for you. Because I can't tell you the number of times I hear from people, "Well, FEMA will take care of it. Yeah. The insurance company will handle it. The fire department will rescue me," things like that. That is when things become a disaster, because now you're relying on other people to handle things for you. So when that doesn't work, all of a sudden now you're in a place where now you really have a problem. So the point I'm making to people is I say, you need to take control and command of your own disaster. That's what you have to do. Then you can design it in a way to make it so that it turns your life into an advantage. It gives you a great opportunity to change your life, improve your businesses, improve your communities, and improve your families.
Well, that really resonates with me, because one of the key accelerants in my career was the Great Recession. That started with the real estate disasters of 06, 07. And that was the time in my life when we faced a choice. And nobody was going to ride in on a white horse and make it all better for us. So we had to design our way out of it. So that really, really does resonate with me. But in many companies, disaster preparedness and recovery planning is a total afterthought. What do you say to the leaders and managers who believe that they're too busy to engage in proper disaster planning, or they don't see the direct payoff in engaging in that work?
Okay, well, I'm going to answer both of those really simply. The first one is that, and I'm going to answer the second question first, which is the advantage is that in business, if there is a disaster where there is a hurricane, there is a tornado, there's an earthquake, I want you to stop looking at that as an obstacle to hold your company back. And I want you to think about it like you would when any other business challenge arises. How can I use this to my advantage? Because in disasters, I always say, if you're open, your competitors might be closed.
Right.
So that may give you a chance to build up market share. In addition to that, what if there is a project that you've been wanting to pursue internally in one of your business units and said, "You know what, I just haven't had the time to do it." Well, you know what? You got time now. Implement the policy now. If you have a lot of people who are leaving, which has happened after the pandemic, I told this to client after client after client. I said, listen, if you have a lot of employees leaving, that's terrible, but let's use that as an opportunity. Now we're bringing in new people. You know those cultural changes you wanted to make at the company? Now's the time. Yeah. And that brings me to the first question, which is, what is is it why does it seem so hard? It doesn't have to be hard, because really great disaster planning doesn't have a whole lot to do with disaster plans, equipment, supplies, the widgets, the wonder weapons. That's what I always call them, of disaster preparedness. Because again, we're relying on a piece of equipment or a technology on our phones to handle everything for us, when in reality, what makes the biggest difference is the culture of preparedness that you establish at the business. So if you say to people, we have to all be part of the disaster preparedness process, then all of a sudden you now have people who are invested. I have seen company after company who they design great disaster plans. They hire consultants, people like me, and they come in and they write a disaster plan and they live in a silo, right? So they create this beautiful plan, and then they turn to employees and say, here's this document this really high-paid consultant created for us. You need to make sure you follow it, but don't read it. It's too long. We're just going to give you an hour-long boring training, but we expect you to use the plan. And that never works. So what I tell people is I say, you have to incorporate them. So one of the things I do, for example, is that when I get hired by a company, I'll literally go in, and during the training, I'll turn to everybody and I say, this is the place we're going to evacuate. What do you think? What do you think? And I get a lot of feedback, and I end up incorporating those things directly into the plans itself, because you need to engage your employees. They are just as involved. And you know what you will find? Just that simple process alone will do more than just writing a plan and sticking it on a shelf. Because when people are involved and they feel like they have been communicated with and they've been asked, all of a sudden they are now committed to your disaster program. That's the cultural change. Involve them. Don't do it all yourself. Bring in everyone around you, and you'll have a much more enriched disaster culture at the company.
Yeah. So one of the biggest disasters that can happen to a company is really not in the category of disaster, but it is the significant shift in the client set or the demographics or the buying behavior and folks. So the mental agility and plasticity that you're talking about is really important beyond disaster planning. So I think I may be leading the question, but what's one benefit of disaster preparedness and recovery planning that just isn't immediately obvious to the average leader? So what are the knock-on benefits of preparedness?
Think of it as another way of engaging your employees, because one of the things that we do, and I'm a CEO myself, so I know that when I hire people, I want them to be part of the team. And so people think, okay, I'm going to have them part of the team in their business unit, right? So they're doing marketing, or I have them involved in meetings, or they're working on their projects. And we always stress, right? We always stress, employee communication, right? We're trying to be a friendlier, happier workplace, especially as we hire really younger millennials, people who are born 1997 and forth. And then you have Gen Zers who really expect a lot of dialogue with their bosses. They can't be divorced from that process of working with leadership. Your disaster program can be another extension of that, and you didn't even realize it. It's untapped. So, and if you do it, other companies they've worked with, they may not have ever even talked about this before. So now all of a sudden, you have another way of engaging with them. You have another way of involving them. And that's how you design the disaster away, because you have your most important resource, which is our people. And they are now so much more involved in how we write plans, what equipment should we get, what are really the weaknesses in the program, how can we improve, how can we make the trainings interesting, how do we involve them in drills. That's one of the things I always do all the time. And I find that when we do that, that is a side benefit which buttresses everything else we're doing at the company and the culture of inclusiveness that we are trying to adopt, because I think that that's the cultural shift we're starting to see with younger workers coming into companies, and their expectations are very different than those of myself or my parents or their parents.
Right. Well, thank you for that, Patrick. We're going to take a really short commercial break, and we'll be right back with Patrick Hardy. Hey, it's Andy here. I've got a new podcast I'd like to introduce you to, The Saturday Morning Muse. Start your weekend with me by exploring topics that span leadership, business management, education, and other musings that are designed to support your journey of personal and professional continuous improvement. Subscribe today on your favorite podcast platform. And we are back with Patrick Hardy talking about disaster preparedness and recovery planning in your business. Patrick, what's the most important balancing act? This is the Balancing Act podcast. What's the most important balancing act that you have to play when you're engaging with a new client?
I have to balance what is in their best interest. So the first question I ask whenever I am writing a disaster recovery plan with any business, big, small, anything, and I know, and sometimes I ask this question and they think I'm completely absurd. They think it's crazy. But this question I'm about to pose is the biggest balancing act that we have to play as disaster professionals. And I think a lot of times disaster professionals forget to ask this question because if you don't ask this question, how can you ever figure out what is going to work for your client? And that question is this: if there's a disaster, do you want to recover? Because there are times where there are people working in businesses today that say, this is not for me. This really isn't what I want to be doing. And so, or this business is really run its course. I've had, so an example I give all the time, and actually you talk about this in the book, is I had a great client in the Bay Area, just north of San Francisco. She ran an Italian restaurant, and her family had owned that restaurant. So it had been open for a long time. And in this particular case, I went, I got hired, I came in, and the first thing I asked her was, I said, do you want to recover? And she was shocked. She got this sort of ghost white look, and she couldn't believe it. And she goes, why are you asking me that? And I said, because I want to make sure that what I'm doing is in your best interest and in the best interests of your employees. And so she said, no, I don't. Because I don't want to do what I'm doing. And she ended up going back to school and ended up doing something else after the restaurant burned down after a wildfire. But I said to her, that's fine as long as you're communicating with employees and you tell them, hey, listen, if the business is closed due to a disaster, we have a wildfire, we get something happening here, I'm not going to reopen. Yeah. So you need to know right away, if this place burns down, you need to start to look for a new job because I'm just not planning to reopen. I'm going to take the insurance money. And she actually, she sent me a letter and actually an email. And then she later sent me like a greeting card saying, thank you very much, because she ended up doing what she wanted to do in life for real passion, because she just didn't want to be a restaurateur. She didn't want to be a chef. And so she didn't want to run a restaurant. And so I do that with all kinds of businesses, big and small. And not because I'm saying to a big company, well, why don't you just quit and leave the field? I just say, is there something in your operations that a disaster can put you at a better advantage to? Yeah. Is there something that the disaster can do to make you stronger? Is there a business unit that we can improve because it's closed? Or maybe there's a subsidiary that we've been just wanting to get rid of it. So let's not recover it. It's destroyed. We're going to take the insurance money. We're going to put it into some other business unit or whatever. And that sometimes that's hard with complex businesses, as weirdly enough, small businesses, which you'd think would be the most nimble, because sometimes they have an emotional attachment to them. But I work with clients, and that's the balancing act I have to say. And the balancing act I say is actually the balancing act that they tell me, because I say, what is in your best interest? What's in the best interest of employees? Because that creates an appropriate balance. And that's how you really design disaster.
Well, I love it. It's the ultimate start, stop, continue exercise. Thank you for that. I'd just love to hear a story or two about what happens to the unprepared. What's your favorite "I told you so" or "gosh, if they'd only listened to me" story?
Well, I'm going to tell you, I had this drill I ran in Yosemite, and I was working with an outdoor hospitality property. Okay, so it was a park, and people came in and they stayed there and all that. And I decided to run a drill, and it was in their clubhouse. And so so I said, we're going to run an earthquake drill, everybody. So everyone's going to run in and out and do the whole thing. And I appointed somebody to be in charge. So I put somebody in charge. And I put different employees, I split the employees in half. Half the employees were responders, half the employees were victims. So I put the victims all over the place. One of the victims I put on the second floor. And next to the employee, I put a dog who was owned by an employee or the owner. And I put the dog next to the victim. And I put wires on the victim. So like I'd gone to Home Depot and bought some wires. I just threw it on him. And then I put a note card up and it said, "You must evacuate this dog." Okay. And then on the wires, I taped live wires. Okay. So anyway, so I start the briefing. I say, everybody listen, I put little hazards, safety hazards around the place, broken glass, things like that. Please watch out. Always keep your eye out on any safety hazards you may see. And everybody goes, "Oh, it'll be fine." So anyway, I say, okay, sounds good. We're going to get started. Earth shaking. Okay, stop. Here's the responders. There's victims all over the place. Go. And so they start to run around. And literally, they said, "Okay, you two guys go upstairs." And the rescuers, they went upstairs and they saw the dog, and they said immediately, "I'm going to grab this dog." And they would step on the live wires. And so I had an employee of mine tap them on the shoulder and say, "You've now been electrocuted, so you're laying on the floor." So the first one goes down, then two more go up. And they do the same thing. They trying to touch the dog, and they were grabbing the dog, and the dog was the sweetest dog, by the way. It was the sweetest animal. It was like a golden retriever. It was the sweetest animal. And the next person grabbed the dog, and my employee was tapping him on the shoulder. That happened 3 or 4 times. I have a pile of like 5 responders, and the woman downstairs was like, "Where are all my rescuers? What happened to everybody?" And I said, so we went upstairs. There was a pile of employees all electrocuted. And I said to people, listen, this is a great lesson for you that when you are in a disaster, we love our animals. Those are really important. But remember, don't get tunnel vision.
Yeah.
Look at around you. Assess what's happening around you. I do this to audiences all the time. I always say to them, "What's the first step in CPR?" And I always do this thing where I pretend to do the head tilt, chin lift thing. And everybody goes, it's airway. I said, it's not airway. It's assessing the scene for safety. Because you don't know why he's on the floor.
Right.
Were they shot? Were they stabbed? Were they bit by a rabid dog? Was there a poison gas around? I used to be a hazmat guy. Anything can happen. So those are the kinds of moments I really like. I don't tend to sort of engage in a lot of Schadenfreude after some kind of a disaster because for me, the drills are really the chance for me to engage with people and say, "Guys, now's the chance for us to really fix these things and focus on what's important, because a disaster can be really dynamic and we have to be prepared for anything."
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that leads us into this next question about education and skill development. I went through high school and college, and there was no disaster preparedness recovery.
Me too.
As an absolute afterthought in traditional education systems. How can we make a change there? How can we improve the visibility of this topic in schools and colleges?
One of the things I'm doing on my YouTube channel is that I have decided I'm going to do a series of disaster challenges. So these are unique. They've never been done anywhere. And I'm doing them because I want to energize people. And they're not blood and guts. There's no doom and gloom in them. The first video we just put up 3 days ago was a challenge. I had to evacuate 230 cats. I had to do it in 2 hours with a team of people. And at this it was a cat sanctuary. It was in California. And they had no disaster plan, no training, no nothing. So I had to write the plan, train them, and evacuate all these cats in 2 hours. And we did it. And the video we created was fascinating because what I was trying to show people is evacuations don't have to be awful. They can be entertaining. It can be interesting. And I'm doing a series of challenges just like that. Speaking of CPR, in the fall, I'm going to be going to San Francisco. I'm going to be doing CPR for 30 straight hours without a break. I'm going to be building this hurricane-rated shelter in Florida. Just lots of really interesting things to show people that disaster preparedness doesn't have to be like that. So the answer to your question is we need to do it differently. We can't have this constant doom and gloom. You can't do anything. Oh, everything we're doing is really superfluous. The world's going to end anyway. It's not. You can take these things and make it so you disaster-proof your life. You can design the disaster. The question is, do you want to design it to make you better? Or are you designing it to make you worse? And so really, I tell people you can be stronger as a result of that. So how do we do that with the younger generation? Create and present it in a way that really shows them you can be empowered, because that's the whole message I have for everybody. As I was talking about at the very beginning of this podcast, is always saying, you have to show people, don't be dependent on FEMA. Don't be dependent on other people to handle it for you. You are in charge. You can do it. And that's one of the things I tell people in the age of disasters, you got this. And you really do. You just have to have the tools. And I want to present that in a way that makes it so people say, no, I really can do that. If he can evacuate 230 cats, I can evacuate my 2 cats.
Yeah, experiential learning, meet folks where they're at. We need more of that generally, but in disaster preparedness for sure. Let's close out the show with a little fun. I've got 2 lightning round questions for you. Number 1, you have access to a time machine. You can send a very short message to an earlier version of Patrick Hardy. What's the message, and what previous version of yourself do you choose to send it to?
It would be September 28th, 1999. And I remember that date because I really had sort of bottomed out. I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. It was just after high school. I mean, I was really a mess. And the message I would give to myself is, don't fight the future. Don't fight the future. Let it happen. There's going to be ups. There's going to be downs. That's the way it goes. But in the end, don't fight what's moving, because it's going to put you in a place where you're going to be successful. If you just position yourself in a way that you feel as though you're going to be successful, you give yourself the tools, you don't sabotage yourself, you'd be amazed at what happens. And whether or not people believe in, in sort of a higher power, or whether it's sort of internal or your karma, whatever it is, don't try to battle yourself. Really try to say, I'm going to flow with it. And that's the message I would give to myself, because that's the way life always is, right, Andrew? I mean, like after in 06 and the big changes that you had to go through, people didn't realize these are opportunities for us. And when I talk about disasters, I tell people, don't fight the disaster. Use it to your advantage.
Yep. Awesome message. Second question, we are all works in progress. What are you focused on right now in your personal journey of growth?
Well, it's really interesting because I no longer handle the day-to-day stuff at my business. So now I'm a content creator full-time, and that's very interesting because it's a brand new world.
Yeah.
Right. The zeitgeist is such that it's fast, it's different, you have to be really visual and engaging. And I really try to do that because, and the balancing act I have to do, interestingly enough, is when I create videos, is I want them to be sensationalized, but I want to make sure people know we're not just doing things to do them. We're doing things to educate you. I joke around with my crew all the time and my staff. I always say, it's like I'm serving people broccoli, but I'm putting so much sugar around it, they don't realize they're having broccoli. So they'll eat their broccoli very, very well, and they won't realize it. So that's what I try and do and that is the engagement. That's the challenge I have for the next 20 years of my career, is really trying to find how can we really change the conversation on disasters. And I always tell people, stay tuned, because I plan to do a lot of things to really make it a difference in how we look at disasters and how we respond to them and make ourselves stronger as a result.
Well, unfortunately, I think you're going to be really busy, Patrick. I think we have a lot in front of us, a lot of opportunity to design our futures. Final question, what's next for you, and where can people, our listeners, learn more?
Well, if you want to learn more, you can go to disasterpatrick.com and you can start the adventure there. There you can learn about me. I'm a keynote speaker, so I keynote all over the world. I'm obviously a YouTuber now. I can't believe it. My first video went up 3 days ago. It's about 2,000 views. Andrew, you got to promise me you're going to watch that video and you're going to like and comment on it. If you think it's deserving a like, I got to get a like from you and a comment too. But I'm doing videos now and I'm doing content creation. I'm doing what I'm doing today and talking with you. I'm writing articles because it's my time to say, of all the things I've learned over the last 20 years, I really want to start taking it out and saying, it's time to make a big difference. And with 97% of Americans not prepared for disasters, that's unacceptable. And so I said, let's revolutionize that. Again, that's why I put that in the title. We're going to revolutionize the way in which we think about disaster preparedness. and put ourselves at an advantage. And so the next steps in my career is creating YouTube videos and creating social content and really commenting and listening to people. It isn't just putting up content and saying, this is the polemic, this is how it has to be. I want to put it up and say, what do you think? And so I'm hoping that continues to catch on. I know it will. I feel very confident about that. I'm excited to do lots of keynotes. And I'm going to give a little bit of a challenge to the listeners. If any of you have a disaster challenge and you think you want to challenge me to it, I don't care if it's evacuating, sheltering in place, locking down, or preparedness, or equipment, or a training. I don't care how hard you think it is or how easy you think it is. Send it to us. And my producers go through all of it, and I'd love to come down. We come down. It doesn't cost you anything. And as a thank you for letting us do a challenge there, we will create a disaster program for your organization. So we're really excited about that. I think this is going to be a really wonderful way to be able, for people to be able to, as we say, eat their broccoli.
That's awesome. Well, Patrick, thank you so much for your time today. This was such an impactful conversation.
I enjoyed it.
All right.
Thank you very much for having me, Andrew.
Excellent. My name is Andy Tempty. This is the Balancing Act podcast. You can find us on all the major streaming services. Please like, subscribe, rate, and most importantly, share this public good with your friends and your colleagues, especially this episode on disaster preparedness. We will see you next time on the Balancing Act, and this show is produced by Nicholas Tempty.